Welcome to episode 4 of the Value Exchange podcast. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Harrison Ward, who is also known as the Foodie. He's an author, avid hiker, motivational speaker, and well-being advocate. Harrison, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
Good. And can you tell the camera where you've come from today?
So we're in Salford today. I've not had too far to coming down from the Lake District in Ambleside. So just straight down the M6 today to here. I mentioned before, I think before we started, that I'm from Carlisle originally, and it always seemed that Manchester was a long journey away from sort of Carlisle, but being more slightly further south in the lakes now, quite a short jaunt. Used to driving around the country these days as well for lots of events and festivals, so quite a short journey to get here today.
Amazing. Thank you. Let's dive straight in. I guess where do we need to start to understand your journey? Because the Harrison sat in front of me today is probably not the same Harrison as 3 to 4 years ago. Is that fair to say?
I think that probably is fair. I think while certain traits obviously probably still exist from that time, there was probably moments where I certainly wasn't as outspoken about certain things now as I was back then. But for me, I suppose, again, briefly as mentioned at the start, growing up sort of outside Carlisle and quite a rural upbringing, quite countryside based, I think where you're from does play quite a big part maybe in life going forward, both for good and for bad at times. But for me at that time, I was just on the edge of the Lake District, not too far from there. Again, for those that know me these days will know I spend quite a lot of time there, living there, out in the fells. And for those that haven't been, glorious place, really well worth visiting, being out there, stunning national park. But I didn't really embrace what was on my doorstep at the time. Didn't really go on any hikes, whilst appreciate perhaps the natural beauty that was there. I was someone that maybe was more akin to maybe playing football with my mates or on the games console type thing. So not really going out to hiking those hills at the time. But again, did love my sport growing up, was very sort of social, plenty of friends in the area. But again, was certainly not one that would be keen on walks at the time. And my dad maybe, looking out. And we drove past, I think, on the M6 once, and he was pointing to the mountains going, look at those views out there, son. I was going, it's just hills, Dad. I'm not bothered. It just didn't sing to me at the time. The opposite to what it is now. But I suppose around this time too, I was quite a happy-go-lucky child. I had a good childhood. I mentioned my dad there, but mainly brought up by my mum, single parent, nurse at the time. Spent a lot of time with my grandmother growing up while she was working nights at the infirmary. But was still very social with friends and bits at school and good academically at the time. But through sort of my teenage years, I found myself really going through quite a major change, as we do normally physically, but also mentally for me at the time. Went from being someone that was quite carefree, not having any really afflictions, to really overnight someone that was really contemplating their own existence, their purpose in life, hugely sort of demotivated, very insecure, and very sort of conscious of my place and where I sat in the world. And it was something that really kind of dogged me from day one, really till now, I suppose, consistently through that time. But something that was really what was the beginning, I suppose, of my first introduction to what is now a clinical depression diagnosis. But at the time, not really understanding what I was going through, and also not wanting to be a burden to anybody else around me, I guess, not bringing people down with what I was going through and speaking out about it. So that certainly was a major point of change for me.
It sounds like you had quite a normal childhood, but during puberty and that developmental stage, you start to struggle with what now we would call depression. So them difficult feelings. Also, something you said there is you're now more outspoken about certain things than you would be back then. What are those things?
Yeah, I was trying to choose my language properly at the start there. I suppose outspoken, and I'm not being controversial or anything out there on certain topics, but I think I just meant obviously I'm speaking a lot more about these particular topics and about my personal experience with these topics as well that I wouldn't have really shared in the mirror at one point, let alone sharing now to, people on stages and bits talking out there or podcasts like this or perhaps my social media channels. So that was something that took me a while to get to. I mean, again, I didn't want to be that burden to anybody else. Really did sort of suffer in silence for a number of years. It wasn't really until I got to maybe even early adolescence, early adulthood, sort of 25, till I really started speaking out about this, going through after a major breakdown, which I'm sure we'll get to as we go through chronologically. But I mean, it's kind of one of those, I think it's important to touch upon sort of the child at the start, because there's often quite a lot of things there. Certainly you see maybe the Hollywood psychiatrist, don't they? And they go, let's look down to your childhood there. What happened with your parents? Or is that the cause of all this? And for me, I don't think it really was. I can't complain about any childhood there. You know, it was one of those that working class family, but we had food on the table. Mum was always working, good education. You know, lived in a nice part of the country. But again, by chance of being born there, I guess, but not something I could really blame for anything that was going to come later on. But again, that was quite a guilt internally too, the fact that I felt I really had nothing to really complain about to certain people. People were far worse off than me, not only in this country or even further afield. So it was kind of one of those battles mentally that you're kind of going, well, why should I feel as if, you know, I'm not worthy of my place in this world, or, you know, really battling who I am, really hating myself, or, you know, and at times really battling with, you know, suicidal ideations and not wanting to exist any further. It was a real darker time, I suppose, at the moment, which carried on through adolescence and early adulthood, but also was one at the time, I guess, growing up maybe there, early 2000s, the internet very much in its infancy. I guess, you know, it was still very much that quite blokey mantra. It was always down the pubs. It was still boys don't cry. There weren't people talking out about mental health like there are now. There weren't fantastic sportsmen or, you know, role models on the TV or film stars talking about this. So when you were going through it, you felt very alone, really, that this was only you going through this at the time, and not being, I suppose, not brave enough, but also not feeling able to speak about that to anybody else close to me.
Yeah, it sounds like a very silent struggle, something you kind of dealt with just on your own because of kind of the era of just suck it up, boys don't cry, them kind of mantras. At what age do you think you was able to kind of label it as depression? Because obviously you said, I struggled with these things in my head. I didn't know what they were because I wasn't educated on it. At what age was you able to go, oh, this is what I'm suffering with, this is an actual issue?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, actually, not one I've had before, but 'cause I think it's something that I don't think I really knew at the time. I think I just felt like this was me now, and this was really how I had to carry this. There was the cross to bear, and this was just mine to go further with. Because it was so overnight, and that was kind of the constant from that moment, you didn't know any different either. And whilst I suppose maybe it was touched upon at some point in maybe some classes at school and things, maybe we had someone came in to speak about elements like this as they did about, you know, maybe drugs and sexual health and alcohol and stuff at the time. I suppose it was still something that wasn't really completely out there. I mean, we'd only come from times that perhaps any mental health issues or at the time were quite seen as quite negative in society, weren't they? They were kind of pushed away to going, oh, they're not okay. We don't mingle with them too much. We don't hang around with them, or they're always down, or they're a bit wacky. It wasn't kind of seen as maybe more typical as it is now, where I think now we all know that we all have mental health. I mean, some of us suffer more with mental illnesses than others, but we all go through ups and downs at any point. So it's understanding that as a society now more. For me personally, I suppose, I mean, I did maybe express maybe some concern to the doctor maybe when I was maybe 15, maybe sort of that sort of time. You know, I wasn't feeling myself, maybe demotivated there. I was quite lethargic, not wanting to really go and do certain things, even though I knew there were things that I liked to do, or activities or social occasions I like to go to. But I was battling, I suppose, this other almost doppelganger inside, really, this alternative personality. But I think it was kind of labelled there perhaps as the elements, maybe the start of depression there. But at the time, I think I wasn't really willing to accept it either. And you're still young, I suppose, you're still battling off that. You're still, again, maybe reacting to society and that around you, wanting to be seen as strong, masculine, not wanting to be seen as weak in any way. So that was kind of still definitely a mantra for me. So it probably really wasn't until adulthood that I really came to terms with it.
Wow. So quite the journey you've been on there through your teenage years, suffering. You've spoken out about it, and the doctors kind of labelled it as maybe early depression. Then you didn't want to kind of accept it. You wasn't willing to go, this is actually something that I'm suffering with because I don't want to be seen this way by society because that's the way they currently label it. At what point did you think I need some support, or did you never reach that point? Did you just continue to suffer in silence?
So very much, I suppose, keeping this to myself at the time. Not speaking out about what I was going through. Just kind of really feeling that this was really life now, I guess, for me, sort of pushing forward, but also not wanting me to be here. I was constantly battling with moments of not knowing where I was going, where my peers, my friends, you know, had life sort of planned out in terms of their educational routes or what they were doing in life, and I was just constantly a bit sort of getting through, doing grand at school, but not really applying myself in any way, not having any aspirations going forward. Because really, I couldn't really see myself past certain points in life even existing. I felt as if I just didn't really have a place going forward. It was a very, very, very uncertain time, I guess, for me, and a very confusing time too. But I think I was also someone that didn't want to really seek the help, maybe medicinally at the times or with other elements, because I felt that was almost quite a permanent change. I felt like it would almost change me in a way too. I guess there was maybe a fear of that at the time. And that continued for quite a while, I suppose, fear of, sometimes we hear maybe about, doctors that do maybe push medication maybe too soon on certain people rather than as a cure-all. But for others, it can be a really vital element to help people get through these moments. For me, at that particular time, I wasn't really revealing exactly what was going on. I probably wasn't willing to really share, even to the doctor or even people in society, people in positions of authority, what I was really going through internally. I wasn't talking about the fact, I wanted to kill myself most days, or I was considering other bits, and even, at times, really researching quite bad things on the internet, I guess, about sort of, how to really end your life and stuff at the time. You wouldn't want to speak about this stuff because it felt as if that wasn't the normal thing to do at that sort of age. So, yeah. And no one else you were speaking to was going through that. So I think I found myself a lot in music at the time. I really found music as quite an escapism, listening quite sort of those melancholy tunes out there, or, things that maybe articulated well through spoken word. That found quite maybe healing and comforting. But it wasn't really until maybe 18 that I found sort of another tool for me at the time, which was alcohol back then. So I wasn't someone that was, down the local park with a bottle of cider. I wasn't someone that was sneaking out maybe booze from my mum's house. But of course, we had the parties mixed growing up, younger age, drinking out there, maybe down the local pubs at times getting served. But it was something that I didn't really see as anything other than a natural societal movement again at the time.
Yeah.
A natural rite of passage. At 18, that's what you do. You go down the pub, that's what the blokes do. We have a drink to celebrate, and that's it. You're in that cycle now with the blokes and with the adults. And that was still kind of that traditional route that I saw. And I worked quite a lot in the hospitality trade at the time, sort of my younger years. So I was pot washing at 13, so I was in around these setups, maybe quite young, but get a few pennies for myself, maybe to help with also my mum's wage, to get things for myself. 15 waiting on, and 18 being able to legally sort of dispense alcohol, so starting to work behind the bar. And it was at this point that I really, I suppose, began to be introduced to people that maybe I wouldn't have come across normally throughout my school years at the time, perhaps through family life, so meeting people from all different walks of life, but also enjoying the fact that it was quite a social setting.
Yeah.
It was all fueled by this sort of social lubricant at the time. And this drink was really helping alleviate a lot of maybe the darkness that was in my mind as well. It was shutting off a lot of those thoughts. It was silencing them. And early doors, again, tolerance was very poor. As we all go through this, I suppose, those that do have drunk or do drink, initially that's it. You're a couple of beers and that's it. What's this? I've never felt this before. I'm completely inebriated, completely drunk, stumbling home. But that, doing more and more of that, built that tolerance further, and as it went as well, it alleviated some of those issues I was having in my head. So I saw this as quite a tool early doors for me. And maybe that was, again, that coming out of childhood, adolescence into adulthood, thinking, is this what maybe people see with alcohol? Is this why alcohol is a big thing in the country? I don't know. Is this why people do what they do all the time? As well, there was things you enjoyed tasting. I enjoyed the craft towards it, but really I was enjoying that sensation of the fact it was giving me an escapism from my own head.
So I guess at the time you wanted to be just like a traditional man. You sucked up your feelings and didn't speak about it. You kept it to yourself because you believe it's just what men do. Secondly, you turn 18 and you think, all the men are down at the pub drinking. Again, this is just what men do. So I guess you weren't to know any better. You are just following society, doing what everyone else is doing. And it's difficult to do differently if you don't know differently. But obviously, is it something you noticed looking back that you use it as an escapism, or at the time did you go, oh, this turns them thoughts off in my head, I should do more of this? Or was it just I'm being social, I'm drinking, and it turns the thoughts off in my head, win-win?
Yeah, I think as you said in that first sort of point there, I suppose you are following that blueprint in a way, aren't you? I suppose there's a bit of conditioning in there too, whether it be in societal or whether it be in upbringing or locality. There's definitely a path you're looking to follow in a way that's kind of, this is what you see maybe on the movies, or you see sort of in the telly, you're seeing it maybe elsewhere. So I suppose I hadn't really thought of that actually, but you are kind of naturally following that path because it just seems as if that's the route that's already trodden, in a way. But of course, a lot of this is retrospective. It's looking back on how it was to a way. I don't think in those early times I really knew that I was using this as a tool. But certainly as time went on, I remember even using that language, the fact that this is my medicine. I think when, drinking a bit at the time with maybe some peers, or even I think my mum at one point, she questioned, she was someone that was always, one pint was too much, to be fair, kind of very much a bit too on that side. But it was always kind of going, no, this is it, it's helping me, but not speaking out what was going on internally. So quite quickly, I think I knew it was that sort of tool for me. But also it still felt part of that blueprint. We'd go to the football, we'd play football on a couple of days a week, we'd go to the pub afterwards. I was working that setup, so again, after a shift, what you did, you had a couple of pints with who you worked with, and it was always around there. And also society, again, you were looking, weddings or funerals, christenings, it was always fueled around alcohol all the time. And whilst, we'll get to it, but I don't drink these days, and I haven't become anti-alcohol, but you do start to notice how ingrained it is on all points of really our culture in a way. It's always there, pockets there, but as time went on for me, certainly moving away to university, to York around sort of 19, so I was a year later going to university. Again, I mentioned before, not really knowing my path, so I think I made a few decisions, a few changes, I suppose, through extra education to go, right, I don't know what I want to do, but trying to pick something that maybe in the end, maybe suited my personal traits, I felt. So I ended up going for business at the time to go and do it at York. And moving away to this city, I suppose, growing up quite rurally, not having access to a lot of these things on your doorstep, being in a new environment that nobody really knew who you were, it was almost like the chance of a bit of a reset as well, to re-establish who you were. But I was already known at this point as quite a big drinker, someone that could put stuff away. Again, maybe that rugby mentality as well, quite hollow legs, you could sink a few beers. That was quite masculine as well. If you couldn't drink a lot, that seemed as if it was quite
feminine.
Yeah, exactly. There was those traits there that were ingrained, again, just culturally. So going away to that different city, what do we do at the start of university? It's all about sort of freshers week, meeting new people, 2 weeks basically of constant drinking, meeting new people.
Yeah.
Again, that social lubricant, breaking down those barriers of nervousness to meet new people, which was something I was more than happy to get involved in. I was already quite established, and that was already quite a daily drinker at this point. But following those weeks, again, as things started to settle more, and everybody else seemed to fall back in the plans of, right, that we're here to study now, we're doing this, or picking up little jobs, I did find myself quite quickly getting a job again in the hospitality trade, but also was someone that was still utilising this now as a tool on the side medicinally. And something's got to give really at this point. I'm starting to drink more and more at the time. My tolerance has increased to huge amounts, and really things began to snowball for me at this point. And quite quickly, I'd ballooned in weight. I'd put about 7 stone on. I think I was about 15 stone when I moved there. I was 22 stone before I was sort of 20. I was now drinking every day to quite heavy excess. At my worst, a bit later on, I was drinking in excess of 20 pints a day, working in the trade, kid in a sweet shop in that setup. I'd taken up smoking as well, and I was very much an anti-smoker at the start, but it just fell naturally into that path through the hospitality bit and through the social side of things. That even when I was smoking, I still didn't see myself as a smoker whilst I was smoking 1 or 2 packs a day, but still didn't see it as, I'm a smoker now.
Yeah.
It was just I occasionally have a smoke when I drink, but when do you drink? I drink every day. So I was just constantly in this path. And even then, I suppose I didn't see it as it becoming an issue, but I was finding very much escapism and finding this as quite a crux to help me go through these mental issues. So university started to fall by the wayside. I wasn't turning up on the regular. I was constantly sleeping in because I was drinking up into the early hours. Again, that countryside element to the city now. Places are open till the early hours, so I'm very much making use of that. And just every waking hour, I suppose I'm back in the pub trade. That was also providing the finance for me. I wasn't someone that was getting paid by mum and dad to be at the university side of things, which didn't come from that side of things. So I had to finance things myself, which therefore that was providing that bit of money to utilise this tool that was then helping me personally. And again, this is all retrospective. I'm not going through the time thinking this is what I'm doing, this is how I'm helping myself. But looking back, that's how things really began to escalate from a couple of beers at 18, falling down the street on your way home, to now all of a sudden drinking 14-hour benders most days, and literally brushing my teeth with the stuff at one point. Opening a can in the morning, straight again, starting again. That was never any hangovers, because really I was probably never under the limit for years and years and years, and this just naturally fell into that path University fell by the wayside. I went full time into the pub trade, and by this point now, I suppose, not knowing, but I'm now an alcoholic. Really, I'm utilising this tool every day of my life. My sole focus is getting my next sort of fix, and just really drinking myself to blackout oblivion each day to keep myself present, existing in life, because I didn't want to be here. I didn't want to exist.
Wow, quite the progression of just starting from drinking a little bit here and there when you're 18 to just full blown drinking every day, in the morning, at night. Obviously university falling by the side. I can see how it impacted everything, and I feel like university was probably, although it seemed like a good step externally, he's in education, he's moving towards a potential career. Actually, behind the scenes, that couldn't be further from the truth. And something you said there was, you had to work because, your mum and dad couldn't fund you while you was at university. Do you think if your mum and dad could fund you while you was at university and you was fortunate enough not to have to go out and get a job, you would still work? Or was that work was solely just to provide for your next drink?
Yeah, interesting. Again, that's about putting yourself in someone else's shoes, I guess, in a way, isn't it? Because that's not something I've ever known, I suppose, in a way. I've not really. We certainly weren't, poor, but we were mum was a nurse. It wasn't, huge salaries and sort of way there. It couldn't sustain, 2 salaries on the back of that. Certainly not. But she definitely did a bit for us growing up, me and my sister. But moving away to an element like that, I think it's something that I quite liked working. I had a job sort of quite young, I suppose, again, 13. I remember sort of telling them I was older, maybe 14, 15 at the time, and getting the job. And I liked a bit of that, maybe independence. I suppose I was quite independent early on. Maybe that was a bit, again, about, my dad, though we're close. I didn't see a lot of him growing up. He moved away. He was in the RAF and moved away a lot. They divorced quite young. So perhaps there was an element there, maybe even of trying to fill the man's shoes a bit in the house as well, maybe early on, that there was elements in there. So I liked working for myself. I liked being independent. I liked maybe having a bit of that. But I also liked, maybe this is a practical mindset. School, I was strong academically, but I was someone that was very much, I do a lot better with practical bits. So things like chemistry and geography, where it was more actual experimentation-based bits there, or seeing the natural changes of a landscape or a chemical, or sort of titration experiments type thing. Whereas more analytical processes, and maybe I struggled a little bit with, where a job for me felt as if I knew the outcome all the time. I knew what the purpose was, and what to do. So I kind of always felt like I excelled more working than I did in my studies. But again, that natural path, I was able to go to university. I got the grades to do so. So that felt as if the natural blueprint once again to follow. Again, not anybody else in the family, because I was the first member of the family to go to university, but it just was that natural, maybe societal step that this is what you do next. But again, in a different light, something that maybe would have gone really well. I didn't end up finishing. I left university in the end. I didn't get my degree. I tried to go. I did 3 years in the end, but didn't succeed. But a different path without the afflictions. Maybe it could have been a very different path altogether. But I was trying to do it all at once, I guess, at all times. But without that, the question, I suppose, of having, it's very difficult to consider, isn't it? I mean, because you've just never known any different, really. You just always know it is. Yeah, I mean, it's one that you don't come to terms with. I mean, especially when you see more like politically in sort of this country now and stuff, with people trying to put themselves in people's shoes, and until you've lived it, so you don't understand, do you? But I always enjoyed working there. I enjoyed the people you met, and I think it was a good grounding. I thought it was a good life experience in there. And even the pub trade, whilst later on it took me down this sort of slippery slope, and there is elements of that with unsociable hours and willpower and access maybe to certain substances. But I always found it was a great ground and a great level and a great, schooling for me. So I'd really recommend it to anybody in that sort of trade. I love the fact I met people from all walks of life, from the plasterers to the bankers to, the doctors to the shopkeepers. Everyone was coming in. It was kind of very much a grounding space. So the conversation was brilliant. So I really liked that community aspect to it at the time. But I suppose just otherwise, it was also, I was a bit of a kid in a sweet shop. So again, it was maybe I found myself in that setting because it was also suiting what I wanted to get out of it at the time. So I can't see the alternative to your question there. I can't visualize myself in that path of not having that.
Yeah, it's tough. It's like I said, it's trying to imagine just a different life that you've essentially not lived. But I mean, to go back to your point, you said, I realised I was an alcoholic. At what point was that? Because obviously we spoke about societal norms, and drinking is a massive part of the culture. So actually to try and recognise someone who's an alcoholic, it's quite difficult because everyone drinks above the recommended limits. It's almost celebrated to go, I can down 20 pints. It's like a celebration. It's a bit of a badge of honour. So when did you kind of realise, I'm struggling here, I've got a problem?
So, again, retrospectively, for me, I don't think it was until I had the breakdown I had in 2016. So at which point I'm 25. Where we are in the story at the moment, I'm sort of still 19 going 20. So I hadn't really come to terms with it at the time till then. Obviously, things have changed a lot in my life. Physically, I've changed a lot. From the outside now, it's not just an internal mental silent battle now. I've put 7 stone on, so it's quite noticeable that there's a big difference going on, something here. But I wasn't speaking out still about anything, and I was still quite, a jovial character. I was still someone that, heart on the sleeve type bloke. So I suppose you wouldn't also question it either to certain people. But as time went on, I guess, I was known as a big drinker amongst my friends. A lot of my friends from school, who I'm still very thankful to be very close with, to this day, they weren't the biggest drinkers. And whilst they liked going out a bit at that age, look back now, and really it wasn't, I think even some of their partners used to really much hate the fact that they were going out with me because they were going to mean they were going to get absolutely blottoed. And but for me, that was it. That was my daily routine. It was just constantly in that. So I wasn't surrounding myself by people in that space. I was certainly maybe finding groups along the way that were living that same lifestyle. But I was quite a solitary sort of drinker in a way. And again, that independent side of me, I just sort of did this by myself. The reason I started going out all the time initially was because everyone else wasn't committing. They were almost going, oh no, I'm doing that on that day, I'm doing that. And I fancied going out. So I just thought, well, I'm going by myself. So it wasn't even a fear of not being confident in yourself. But internally, it was just really silencing bits. So yeah, 21, I had a big celebration. That was obviously, again, a big milestone. A lot of people came to visit me in York, and that was a really, really boozy affair. And one that kind of started to let the guard down a little bit. Whereas all the little friends, I said little friends then. There was some little and big friends at the time. They all started to go home one by one from this city. And it really began to sort of really realise how alone I was actually in this city at the time. That was a bit of a dawn in the fact I was just drinking constantly each day, walking around the city by myself, bouncing from bar to bar after my shift. Whilst they're always social settings, really I'm just a bloke at the end of the bar, an anonymous figure, drinking himself till he stumbles home in the evening. So you aren't kind of a bit of a shadow bouncing around these places. So that kind of dawned on me a little bit, the fact that, I know loads of people in this city, but they're all bartenders, taxi drivers, takeaway owners and bouncers. It's like, it's all part of that routine. There's no one that's really someone I'm going to go, should we go and do this weekend? Or should we go and enjoy this activity? All ingrained in that path. And these friends began to go home after this celebration again, maybe 5 days or so. And after the last session, I was just walking home to my digs in York, completely out of my head, really. I don't remember the full extent, but I remember, the basics. And I didn't have a phone at the time. I didn't like to be contacted. I didn't like to be bothered. I didn't like people sort of, getting into my business of, maybe taking. So I suppose these signs were there as well.
Yeah.
I was hiding things, which were starting to be these signs. And I made a call home at the time to my mum at this payphone near my house. And I really had one intention, and it was just to really say goodbye. I felt like I could no longer really go on with who I was. Alcohol wasn't providing the escapism for me anymore. Whilst, yes, it was shutting the thoughts off a bit, it was now really just sort of dampening them. They were still there. They were just quieter in a way. And it wasn't a sustainable path. And really, I saw the only really way to escape this was to sort of commit the ultimate, really, and shuffle off this mortal coil. So that was quite a moment, really, of opening up to a degree. But I was completely, well, I don't even swear on them, completely pissed, really, on the time on this. So I wasn't really wanting to share that truly at the time. So I was taken back to Cumbria at the time. I saw some medical help again, that family doctor once again at the start. We'd sort of express what was going on. He was asking my consumption levels. I was honest, I'd say what I did. but I didn't see it as an issue. And the bit I was most annoyed about was the fact I'd almost let my guard down, a chink in the armour. I'd allowed people a little bit into what was going on. I'd spoke about the fact, I'm not quite right in the head, I'm feeling suicidal. And now I hated the fact that people were sort of asking you how you were all the time, and they were there and almost nambering over you a little bit. So I was quite pissed off with myself, really, at that point. And I booked a train back to York and continued exactly the same lifestyle, drinking myself to oblivion each day, blackout drinking, until 25 at that point. So it was the 6th of June. The 6th of June 2016 was the day I really came to terms with this. And I was in a relationship at the time, something I'd really wanted, to share sort of life with somebody else. And again, that blueprint as well, maybe future wife and kids and that sort of thing. But really, I wasn't I wasn't able to balance on this path that was going through life. I was all over the place. And alcohol was obviously providing certain problems with that relationship. It was providing things that, arguments, I was very unreliable. I was acting out of character at times. I wasn't aggressive, but I was certainly someone that was not very nice to be around at times, and would put that ahead of anything else. Any family event, friends, I was always late to things because I'd be drinking more beers down the road. So it would cause arguments. And one particular argument, I went out and I acted unfaithfully to this partner, and it was discovered, and rightly so, it was the end of that relationship. But it really sort of made me think how far I'd really fallen and who I believed I was at this point. And it was that day really that I came to terms with the fact I was an alcoholic. I felt as if I could no longer control my relationship with alcohol. I couldn't blame it for what I'd done. I had to take that responsibility myself. That was me ultimately. I'd done that. It wasn't the alcohol doing that. That was just a catalyst. But I felt as if it was now compromising me as an individual. I believed I was an honest person. I believed I was a loyal person, and I was acting exactly out of character now. So that was the real dawning for me. So this whole path at that point, only really on that 6th of June moment did I really come to terms with the fact I was an alcoholic. I was out of control here with this now, and I suppose came clean with the fact that this was a tool, a medicinal tool for me now that had become a poison.
Wow. So your relationship with alcohol was impacting your other relationships with friends and family, essentially. If we go back to you saying your mum was like, she thinks one's too much, and then now obviously it's impacted your relationship at the time when you was 25. What did this impact look like? I know you said you would choose alcohol over friends and family, but what did that look like day to day? And was you having arguments? Did you fall out with people over it?
I mean, my daily my routine, I suppose, at the time was I was working quite unsociable hours, I guess, in the pub trade. I was living in the pub at this time as well, so it was all around that setup. And I guess on some days I'd be up to do the breakfast shift in the morning, so I'd be up maybe 7 o'clock or so to start the breakfast shift to cook for the punters in the hotel side, and that could sometimes have me working all the way through to closing the bar at the end of the day. I suppose I was management at the time, so you was probably cleaning the pub in the morning, maybe doing the beds. If the housekeepers didn't turn up, you're opening the pub up, you're serving booze from maybe 12 through to 11, 12 at night. And then as soon as that pub was closed and closed down, that was then me out on the town afterwards. But during this whole phase, I was drinking on the way. So whilst that was something that I was quite secretive towards, I wasn't someone that's openly just a beer behind the bar. It was definitely something that I was, waking up either still drunk or feeling the elements of, regret or hungover from the night before, and was just drinking to start again, that hair of the dog, I guess, to alleviate that bit at the time. And maybe a coffee cup behind the bar, I suppose, I was pouring bits in there, maybe drip trays or bits, or someone bought you a beer and you were starting one off. And of course, that wasn't a typical day all the time, because that was a really full-on shift at the time. But most days I'd finish maybe by 3 o'clock type things, or I'd work an evening shift. So I was able to weave this sort of lifestyle in and around the hours I was working.
Yeah.
So if you finished at 3 one day and I wasn't back on shift until 3 the next day, that was almost like my favourite, because that was a really elongated period that I could really have a big run up for and get absolutely tanked, because I had a longer period where some days I was maybe doing a breakfast shift and I was working through. I had to be back up in the morning. Yeah. It didn't stop me then. I still drink till the early hours, which is why I was probably often late or sleeping in, or people, some of those colleagues were throwing shoes at my head in the morning in the pub to get me up for the next day. But it was so ingrained all the time, and you day to day you're meeting people, I suppose, in that trade that are they're drinking too. They're drinking quite a lot. Maybe they're not drinking every day, but they maybe got higher levels of consumption than maybe the average person as well. So you're not seeing any issues. You're just really seeing the fact that you're a capable drinker. You can put a few away, and in that environment, in that sort of little echo chamber in a way, it's not seeing the full extent. But if I was working in an office job during that, it would be seen pretty clearly straight away. You know, he's turning up stinking of booze, red eyes each day. You know, sometimes hasn't ironed his shirt because he's got up too late to get here. And it would be very clear, and it would be spoken about, and it would probably be a fireable offence at the time. But in the pub trade, it was almost able to be disguised in somewhat. And it was rife across the element, I suppose. You know, you're meeting... I'd go into town after work and you meet other people, you know, other bartenders, other bits, or people or chefs that had just finished their shift that were now straight on it themselves. And it was just a constant cycle. You were in that bit, in that path. That whilst, again, as I mentioned before, I really do love that trade, and I loved what I got from it. But I think for those certain mindsets that were maybe, you know, didn't take too much convincing. I mean, I wasn't someone that was broken down by willpower. These were quite solitary decisions. But maybe you were more susceptible to maybe following that path, maybe unhealthy choices. But yeah, friends from the outside now, again, school friends and stuff, I was starting to get maybe like the ultimatums during this point of things. You know, my behaviour wasn't great when we were meeting up, maybe socially once, twice a year. The comments were made about my levels of drinking. Family, I suppose, stuff were there. But I wouldn't face it. I'd just run away from it, really. I'd just kind of go, take myself out of the situation and just go and drink elsewhere. So looking back, they were there. And I think if this had continued longer term, I think those relationships would have started to crumble and would have started to come away. So you do see how when later down the line, I ended up going to a lot of group therapy sessions, what was known as AA at the time, I suppose, and personal therapy bits for substance abuse. And you were hearing these stories time and time again of people who hadn't come away from the alcohol till later in life, or substances or narcotics, that those relationships had dissolved and fallen by the wayside because it was always getting put ahead of anything else. And that's where I was on that path. I was definitely on that path. The beginnings were starting to be there. For me, I was already heavily in that dosage I was taking. But thankfully, and I do look back very thankfully, because I think without these people that had known me throughout my life, this next chapter that was to begin wouldn't have been possible without their support. But I was very close to losing them before that even began. So I do look back at that as a very much very privileged to have that support network still that I know not everyone has. So an interesting time. I mean, looking back retrospectively, because it's just such a different life to what I live now. It's bizarre almost looking at it, sort of seeing how I was doing that day in, day out, and not seeing it as maybe a problematic thing, but it's almost a bit like a possession in a way. Just it kind of just tells you everything's grand, and you're using that to almost fight that darker demon in your head, but yet the two are conspiring against you really, and becoming entangled and dragging you further down. It was really, an odd path, but certainly cards that I didn't wish to be dealt.
Yeah, and they say hindsight is the measure of foolishness, I believe. But I guess looking in retrospect, I know you said, you know, you're grateful for the trade, and you took a lot from that trade. Do you think that trade took more from you than you took from working in them environments?
I don't know. I gained a lot of experience from that. I mean, certainly in life, you know, I've met friends for life with that trade. I learned things that I wouldn't have come across. I think that the life skills and the life experience of it. I mean, we sometimes used to get people applying for jobs in that trade that, you know, would finish university at maybe 21, even sometimes after masters 22, 23. They were applying for jobs in the pub as a bit of money that hadn't had a job before. And the difference in terms of, you know, even things that seemed quite normal to you that they couldn't comprehend was bizarre. So I think there must the school of life bit that I got from it was hugely valuable. And again, even moving away, you mentioned a bit ago about that moving away to university, maybe not always being the path I maybe should have followed, but the path that I was almost forced into. But I think whilst there was regrets on how I turned out on the way, I don't regret the fact that it was the independence of moving away, having your own property for the first time, you know, paying your own bill. The stuff you learned along the way there was really valuable. So those elements, no, I think I really do rate that side. But I think for me, it was an environment that I certainly maybe overstayed my welcome. And I think I overstayed in that environment because it was easy and allowed me to have that routine that I had. Whereas we said, if I was in an office job or trying to get a job elsewhere or trying to maybe move a career or go further into my studies, that wouldn't have existed as it did with the relationship. It wasn't possible with what I was doing at the time, which could have gone two ways, I suppose. It could have gone me carried on that path and could have gone in that trade forever, or until something worse happened, or ultimately it pulled me out of that trade and tried to rebuild things.
So when did it stop?
So 6th of June 2016, I mentioned, was that exact moment of realisation. I came to terms with the fact I'm an alcoholic, that relationship ended. I went to work the next day on the 7th of June, cooked the breakfast for everyone in the hotel, and coming out of the kitchen, my boss went to sort of say something to me, and I just didn't react, I think, the way I'd normally react to him. Perhaps not, as maybe extroverted or bits there. And he just said, "You don't seem quite right today, mate." And I just broke down there and then in front of him, just completely broke down. And I'd not drunk overnight, so from that moment of the relationship ending, face to face, on the 6th of June, I'd not had a drink from that point to the shift. So the first time I've not had a drink for maybe 7-8 years, daily. I'd put my last pack of cigarettes in the bin, so I'm all over the place, sort of, I guess, withdrawal, coming to terms with the fact of what I'd done, losing my ex. It was all over the place mentally. And he said, "Go take a minute outside to yourself and just sort of, well, that's what he said." And I went outside and I was just sort of staring at the wall, just sort of, absent sort of minded, really. And time was just sort of flying by. And at 3:00, my colleague came to take over the shift, my colleague John. So I'd been out there, not for an hour or so now, I'd been out there for maybe 6 hours, just sat on this bench, not doing anything else, just staring at this wall, not eating, not drinking. And he comes straight out of a pint glass. He hates me telling me this bit, I think. But he said, "Yeah, I'll get this down here. This will sort you out." And I just looked at him and I said, "John, I don't drink anymore." He said, "You what?" I said, "I don't drink anymore." And he just sort of almost shrugged his shoulders and sort of, I can't even put the pint on the wall and said, "Oh, I'll leave this here for when you change your mind." I can't remember what he did. I don't think he did. I think he walked off of it. But it was just, that was really that exact moment that I just knew this was controlling all aspects of me at the time. It caused me to hurt someone that I loved. It was dissolving things around me. And it could no longer play a part. It wasn't helping me. It was doing the opposite. But coming away from that, of course, it meant you had to be very present and, I suppose, accommodating to what was still going on in my head. And really, quite quickly, I came to terms with the fact I could no longer be in this environment. So that day there, I think I was broke down. I called my family. I ended up going to my auntie's for a bit, who lived outside the city. And I returned to Cumbria. And I didn't return to the job. I left my flat. I left my girlfriend. Again, I never touched a fag again, cigarette again. And that's my last day I drunk, that 6th of June 2016. And I came back to Cumbria. And really, I sort of, I guess, digitally put my hands up, in a way. Came clean with why I had to leave that situation and put it on my personal Facebook page at the time. I was quite reclusive, as I mentioned. I didn't really share a lot of stuff. I didn't have a phone. And just said that, look, I've had to leave York. I've been going through some things. I'm going to try and get myself better moving here. I'm sorry to those that I've not said goodbye to. I just had to get out. I couldn't exist in that environment anymore. I'm not sure if it's because of temptation or because of routine or because, maybe willpower on certain bits or the fact my whole personality was ingrained in that city, that I just felt I had to just get out from that. And it wasn't running away from it as such. I think it was just, I was looking for a safer space to try and heal, rebuild, come to terms. And really, I'd be lying if I didn't say the fact I was trying to win this partner back as well. But I returned to Cumbria. And again, going cold turkey, I suppose, from it all, which again, medically, not really advisable from the levels I was consuming, which I didn't know at the time until I spoke to the doctor maybe a week and a half in, by which point I was a week and a half sober. And just really battling so much in my head, this sort of lead balloon of addiction in my head, of trying to really alleviate this sort of substance abuse and come to terms again with mentally what I'd been suppressing for so long. And obviously pining for my previous relationship and previous life. So it was all going on in my head at the time, physically, all sorts. But I tried to throw myself into fitness as a way of trying to replace this hole in my life, because again, that was such a void now, daily. So it was just little walks, It was maybe going to the gym again. I got my old bike out of the shed. I think it was probably too small for me, to be fair, cycling this bike in my local little area back in Cumbria, and trying to really again look at how I was fueling myself again as well, what I was eating. So I'd gone basically drinking this poison, 14, 15, 16 hours a day, smoking. By now it was about trying to leave that behind, eat better food, because it would be maybe falling in the kebab shop or picking a few chips off the counter in the pub kitchen. So it was all about how I was fueling myself to go forward. So I was trying to make this big change, all with a view to proving that I wasn't who I'd become. Try and make this path forward. And really, a really integral part of this was this next bit we'll get onto. It was my friends really coming and rallying around. The support that I got from people, again, putting that message out there on that sort of Facebook channel, really feeling vulnerable, feeling so alone at the time, not knowing what to expect. I mean, fearing judgment, really. But getting comments and responses from people that were there to help and support you from that moment, which was, again, while always, endeavour people to reach out, to speak out about these things, to talk about what they're going through, because there isn't that judgment. And without speaking, you can't get the help you need. And there's always fantastic people. You haven't got the network. Whilst I was very privileged to have that, if you haven't got that, there's always fantastic helplines, fantastic medical professionals, charity helplines to speak out about whatever you're going through. You're not alone through this. And that was the major pivotal moment for me, going through that path. And friends began to turn to my doorstep, I guess, my family home, so at my mum's house, they knew where I lived, back in there at the time, to come and join me on these walks, to come and join me on that cycle. And one particular friend, Ryan, turned up at my doorstep and said, right, we're going to go for a hike in the Lake District today. And again, as I said at the start, somewhere I'd never really embraced. I knew its beauty. I've been to sort of maybe Keswick or Pooley Bridge and enjoyed a coffee and a cake with some family, but I'd never been in the hills before. I didn't have any equipment. I didn't know what to expect. But he rocked up that day. And I just put on what I had to hand, really. I mean, I think I had a pair of some scabby trainers I think I put on. I had some swimming shorts, I think, just to put on. Again, probably trying to fit my big waistline at the time as well. I mean, an old scatty jumper to keep me a bit warm as I was going up the cold hill. I didn't have anything else. And he just looked at me and said, mate, you can't go like that. Look at the state of you. And I was like, well, I didn't have any money. I was paying the rest of my debts. And we got in the car with him anyway. And we drove off. And he pulled off at the local town, Penrith, on the way to the Lake District. We're in this outdoor shop. Grabbed these boots off the shelf, put them on the counter and bought me these boots. It was a real big show of faith, sort of going forward, support for this next path. 20 minutes later, I'm looking up at this huge hillside, Blencathra, for anyone that knows it, quite a big hill in the Lake District, staring up at this mountain now with these new boots on, thinking, what the hell have I got myself in for here? Really questioning that moment of maybe faith and support I've just been given a bit previously. And I was basically frog marched up this mountainside. So again, this is 2 weeks on from that moment of change. So this isn't, I've not built a level of fitness from this point. I'm still all over the place. I'm still going through the withdrawal. I'd so lethargic, just walking pub to pub and going one by one up this hillside, staring at my feet. God knows how long it took. I wasn't recording this on Strava or taking any selfies on the way up. It was just staring at my feet, blowing at my arse, going up this hillside. And eventually, I can't remember, hours, for 5 hours plus, getting to the top of that hill, barely having a chance to take a breath. It was not a great day, actually. It was really cloudy, not many views. But that sense of achievement of getting to the top of this hillside. But having no chance to really reflect on what we'd done, Ryan just turned to me and said, right, we're going to do Helvellyn next week, which was now the third highest mountain in the Lake District, 950 metres. And again, going for that journey again. And it was just a real moment, again, that faith, that support, having someone else to go through this journey with you. Again, doing something new, but also really trying to better myself, trying to really push through who I'd become, I suppose, and try and show that I could be different. Again, I suppose at first, trying to win this partner back. But really trying to really beast myself and I suppose punish myself in a way through this fitness aspect whilst also going through all these other afflictions. But seeking medical help along the way, seeking sort of group therapy, sort of counselling at the time, seeking all the support that was possible, and really becoming quite an open book when I'd spent so long being sort of shut in and silent and not speaking out about this. It was the opposite, allowing this help to be there.
When did that guard drop? So obviously we spoke about Men Don't Cry and all this bravado stuff around the mantras, but you've just spoken openly about I've been to counselling, I've got therapy, I'm seeking all this support, I'm leaning on the people around me, the community. What changed?
It was really just that whole moment, that moment of change, that moment, that pivotal day when really my whole foundations just crumbled beneath me. You know, if you'd asked me sort of who I felt I was at the time, everything that I'd have put there as my traits or my routine or, you know, maybe the sort of jobs and things that I was a custodian for, had all gone and had all changed. So it was rebuilding, it was restarting, it was a redemption sort of time. So I think really there was such a vulnerability at that point already. You were almost in the stocks in the town centre. You know, you had to really put yourself out there to be liable for what I'd done in my behaviour, but putting my hands up to apologise for it and to try and move forward. So I guess it was kind of, you know, almost public flagging in a way of myself, sort of, just really having two ways to go. One was really coming to terms with this and speaking out and saying I need the help, and the other one was to try and just sort of shuffle off quietly and not face the music in a way, whichever way that came about. So that was it. It was from that moment. It's all came about from that moment, that exact moment of, I guess, there was not even being able to really stay silent because you feel so vulnerable anyway. There was no real, you were exposed really. Like, you're just out there. Like, see, accountability, I guess, was the bit there. I just had to be like, look, this is who I am, this is what I've done, in a way, which, whilst it was very much internal for me, not much about that burden, the pain was all on me, or so I felt. I was just constantly putting myself through this cycle. But in reality, I was becoming that burden to those around me. I was now hurting those around me. I was causing pain, you know, whether it was, you know, for the people who loved me or bits in there, or my actions. So my exact aim at the whole start of this was now the opposite. So I guess at that point there, I just felt as if I had to make amends in a way.
Quite the opposite, because you said you didn't want to speak out about your struggles because you felt like a burden. But actually, what you did instead, adopting alcoholism, then became a burden to those around you in your relationship. But it seems like moving home gave you that fresh start you needed. You know, you kind of cut all them ties and them routines and habits in that old environment, and you had the opportunity for a fresh start. Looking back, looking at Ryan's actions, what does that mean to you, looking back? What he did for you in that moment?
I mean, Ryan was one individual amongst many at that time. I mean, Ryan certainly was someone that was quite integral during that path, I suppose, you know, aiding me, encouraging me, supporting, having the patience, I suppose, to go through those activities, whether it was the gym where we started running together later on, up the hills. And it also, it was kind of one of those that they're all integral pieces of the jigsaw. I mean, they're all people around. You look back now, and so it's me talking about this now, either on this platform or elsewhere, but behind you, again, there's always so many other people that have taken you through that moment. So really, he was someone that I think I was just didn't allow that moment of, you know, I can't do this, or I don't know what I'm doing. It was almost just guiding you in a way, just going, right, we're going to do this, mate. I'm just sort of, and putting the step forward first for you to lead the way. And again, maybe even back to those metaphors mentioned before, that path trodden in front of you, almost kind of going, look, I'll walk the path here and you follow me, sort of thing. So that was huge, really, really huge from that moment, really. And not having the chance maybe to even wallow and stuff as well. It wasn't kind of going sitting in my room at my mum's again, maybe just thinking, woe me, or playing the violin sort of thing. It was kind of, it was, there wasn't the chance that. It was kind of just going straight into that path and trying to make the change, and I suppose knowing as well, as I didn't at the time, but that all these friends around me did, that activity and things like that, and doing something away from that, but not only would distract me from perhaps the, you know, the addictive tendencies I'd had and sort of the temptation side, but it's well proven that sort of physical activity and exercise in any form creates that sort of dopamine, that endorphin rush as well. So it creates that sort of sense of happiness, sense of achievement in path that's going to get you out those periods, which I hadn't really, not that I hadn't known, but I hadn't really ever really embraced, I suppose. I hadn't really put that chemical equation together. And you're playing sports as a kid, but you don't think I'm playing sports here because it makes me feel good because my chemical structure changes a bit internally. You don't think that, do you? So all of a sudden now it was trying to replace one vice with another. but trying to make that vice a lot more positive. Because I think a lot of this ultimately is we all just want to be happy. And that's all I really wanted. I wanted to be free from that sort of affliction, free from that derogatory rhetoric in my mind. But you find a vice, and sometimes that takes you on the wrong path, and that could have been drugs, it could have been something else, but it could have been adrenaline seeking, it could have been sex, or it could have been that exercise. And I think that was the path for me now, that was now providing that same sense of relief and endorphin hit and positivity, but without any of that negative that the alcohol side was giving me. There wasn't the downside, there wasn't the big come down, there wasn't the hangover, there wasn't the financial stress or the fear of what you'd done the previous day. It was replacing that one vice for another, but making that vice more positive. And that was really, I think, again, those friends were hugely the conduit for that. Again, the support, making it feel safe. Because it's quite daunting doing something for the first time as well. I think even especially as adults, we're quite scared to do things for the first time, aren't we, I think? Because we fear that judgment again from the outside, or we fear being the beginner. And I suppose when everything's uncovered and you almost feel like you're just there, warts and all, naked and exposed, it didn't really matter if people laughed at you or judged you amidst there anymore, because you're at your bottom. You're at your absolute rock bottom moment. So it was just kind of rebuilding any way I could to try and prove that I wasn't this person that I'd portrayed myself to be, and I'd put myself in that corner. So yeah, these friends are hugely instrumental to that path, and getting me to those next stages. And yeah, I'll really, really struggle to repay them, but always be so thankful.
Amazing. Are you free from it? That affliction?
So, yeah, I suppose, these days, recording of this podcast today, I'm over 8 years sober. I've not had a drop since that day. I've never picked up a cigarette again. I went on a very different path to what it was. I think I still have my ups and downs, mentally at times, but I see it very much as less of a roller coaster now. It was very much, big peaks and big troughs at one point, where now it's sort of little hills and valleys in a way. Quite small, quite routine, but life isn't always rosy anyway. I think you come to terms with the fact that it's not always going to be fantastic times and bits in there. There are many things that come and hit us and we have to sort of deal with. And I think I mentioned briefly at one point having the fact that I do miss sometimes the fact that alcohol allowed me to escape from life sometimes. I don't miss or the taste of alcohol or the bits there, or again the camaraderie, because I'm still very social. I still enjoy those routines. But I sometimes miss that fact you can have that little shut off or fast forward through life a little bit. But what it means, the fact is that whilst you have to be there and present through those darker days, it also means I'm far more present for the better days and the good days. So there's no regrets on that path. I don't see alcohol as having a place in my life ever again. I may mentally be a different mindset. Perhaps, I could drink differently these days, but not worth the risk for me. What I've gained since that point of leaving that behind. And again, I mentioned it just early on, I'm not anti-alcohol in any way. Just for me, certain mindsets and certain individuals, perhaps more susceptible to this sort of thing, it wasn't a substance that was going to ever help me from that path, and one that I was quite powerless towards. And for some people, again, it can be hard to comprehend the fact that you cannot just have one, you cannot just have two. I just literally quite an all or nothing approach. And I've been like that with many things. I think that's quite an addictive tendency, which I think they reckon scientifically is disproven now, but I'm certainly that sort of mindset on a lot of activities, or pack of biscuits, I can't put them down, or food side of things. So those tendencies were there, so it just doesn't play a part for me anymore. So I think, yes, I think definitely move forward from some aspects, but there's also a level of not being complacent around it too. So I think it's something that, whilst, yes, I'm 8 years away from my last drink, perhaps I'm only 1 day away from my next one as well. So it's kind of never really putting people on pedestals on that path, not being complacent towards that. Whilst I do put myself in social settings, whether it's weddings or down the pub or going out, it's just always being a bit mindful of that. And if I don't feel as if I'm particularly comfortable in that environment at any point, feeling tempted to drink on these sort of bits, then I just remove myself from those paths. But I'm open about that, I speak about that. It's not internal anymore, it's understood. And again, I've had very supportive friends and that stuff around me. Some people may have groups of people that don't allow them to remove themselves from that situation because they're so ingrained themselves in that path. And I suppose you almost have to look sometimes and think, well, are these friends on the true format there, or are they friends because they're doing the same routine as you? Are they more acquaintances, really? Well, I was quite lucky to not really have that that sort of path. So I think, yeah, I'll certainly move forward from those bits. I'd certainly think I'm someone that would have those tendencies. Mentally, I think I still have my ups and downs, but again, I speak about it more now. I don't suffer in the silence. I seek the help, and I know what's going to be there. You learn to manage it a lot better.
Congratulations.
Thank you, sir.
8 years is such a massive achievement. I guess, looking back, you probably thought, if we told the old Harrison, you're going to be 8 years sober one day, probably would have laughed, I imagine.
I wouldn't have believed you at all. I think I'd left you at the pub, yeah. I just couldn't see alcohol not having a place in my life at one point. Didn't trust others that didn't drink. I mean, even those early days, not trying to get to an hour, to get to half a day, to get to midnight, to get to a week, it was just all felt so distant. And whilst, yes, it does get easier over time, there are still moments of temptation and struggle. I mean, lockdown was a really difficult spell in particular for me. But it's knowing that and sort of, I guess, facing that a little bit more. And these days, again, it's something that just really... It's almost now more time not drinking in my adulthood than it is drinking, which is quite a bizarre way to look at it. More years out of that path than in it.
Quite separated from it, but by the sounds of it, the depression or maybe the difficult feelings are still there, and you said it's more about maintaining, which leads perfectly onto what I was going to ask. I was going to say, what are the foundations for maintaining your mental well-being these days?
Personally,
Personally,
a philosopher's sort of word there. Well, it's interesting, this one, really, because I think if you'd have asked me this again maybe 3 years ago, I think I'd be speaking quite differently to as I am now. Because currently, I don't feel in the strongest place now myself, really, and I've spoken about this, publicly as well. But routine sort of disappeared a lot for me, sort of in lockdown, as it did for a lot of people. I was working throughout that sort of time. I wasn't going to the gym because they'd closed, they'd shut. I wasn't going to the mountains as much as I had been, using that as a tool, because Mountain Rescue was saying not to go into the hills in case you fell over. And of course, you exposed someone to the virus, which I completely understood. And I really sort of, again, very tempting to drink at that point, because that would have fast-forwarded through that really uncertain phase and got you out to back when life was normal, dare we say. I mean, is it ever going to be normal again? But I really fell back on food quite a lot at that point, I think. I mean, food has been a huge passion of mine that we've not really touched upon as of yet, but there's also been about something that I battle with that too, I suppose, overeating, sometimes comfort eating, maybe not always eating the best things, even though understanding that, I'll feel a lot better if I do have that. But during that point, I think I fell back on that more as a comfort through lockdown, because again, I don't really, again, retrospectively, at the time really knew it, but you are feeling a bit uncertain. There's a lot of stress going around the world with a lot of the rhetoric, and there was a lot of division, and there's a lot of people shouting from both sides. So again, that is going to have an effect on you, even though you don't really know it at the time. And I found myself putting quite a lot of weight back on during that phase. I wasn't going out doing much activity again. And since that path, I managed to go somehow freelance into what I do now from my previous job, into sort of talking more about this as a motivational speaker, the cooking side that we'll mention in a moment. And it was a very different path. So all of a sudden you were jumping out of one fire into another and on a different treadmill. And I didn't quite really establish those routines somewhat. So for me, the question you asked, I'd certainly see sort of, regular activity, physical activity, ideally in the outdoors for me and for anyone. Because I think that's really where we're designed to be. Especially when we're sometimes in the cities here, we can get stuck in that metropolis. But finding some green space, it's such a human experience. I think it's really where we're designed to be in. So activity out there is going to be so great for us, I think, physically and mentally, for that endorphin hit, for the fitness aspect, and to that fresh air and that mind clearing too, away from those menial stresses of day-to-day life. Being quite present is huge. How we're fueling ourselves too. Again, not drinking, excessive amounts of alcohol and eating really crap food and wondering why we don't feel so great. It doesn't take, a scientist to make that sort of equation work, does it? It's kind of what you're putting in has a big effect on how it makes you feel too. So whilst we're not saying everyone's got to go out and suddenly buy, fantastic big organic chickens and all the best vegetables in the world, just trying to be more mindful about the fact we're trying to eat a little bit more consciously or healthier, or not eating so much sort of snacks on the side, or gorging the bag of M&Ms on the evening that I'm guilty of from time to time, is going to have a big impact as well. So they're real big things, I think, that are quite no-brainers for me. And then also, I guess, that sort of social aspect too, because we can get ourselves quite lonely and quite insular. And whilst, although I do quite like my own company at times, I think if you get too cut off from that sometimes, that can be hugely detrimental towards you as well. So again, always trying to make sure you are speaking out to people, whether it's just friendships or families. It doesn't always have to be talking about your deepest, darkest feelings. Just keeping connected to the world. Because even again, sometimes in work or the cities, we can feel a bit like numbers again in the cogs. just going about our business, just going about keeping the world rolling and moving,
Yeah.
but not actually maybe looking at ourselves individually or having those connections. Certainly when I sort of come more to the cities, I mean, less so on the sort of suburbs here, but in the cities themselves, it can feel quite dystopian almost to me at times, feeling as if you're quite a number amongst and quite forgotten. And whilst I like that sort of anonymous nature of it sometimes, if I come into a city for a day or so, it can also feel like you can be quite easily lost or disappear in the system if you aren't keeping connected. So I think that physical activity, how you're feeling yourself, and again keeping connected physically sort of to people, not just sort of digitally, unless that's your only means, are really key. So things that, again, they're three things that I'd be saying to myself right now as well, because I think I need to rebuild that routine still with the fitness. I'm doing a lot more travelling there at the moment. I'm not getting out so much in the mountains and fells that are really giving me so much solace and appreciation. I am still getting out there, of course, but not as much as I maybe perhaps need to. The relationship with food, perhaps I need to sort of re-establishing somewhat. And then the connection side, sometimes I can find myself distancing. Sometimes rather than speaking, you almost distance a little bit from it. So, that's also it'd be 3 tips to put out there, but also I'm sort of talking to myself. That wall in front is kind of in this room we're in here is kind of that's bouncing back to me, echoing to myself that statement.
The advice we give to others is the advice we essentially give into ourselves, what we need. But I think they are 3 key foundations to maintaining your mental well-being: physical activity, nutrition, and connection.
Yeah, it's nothing groundbreaking, is it? Really, it's just
it's the basics.
Exactly. But that's how we are. Sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, isn't it? Sort of fire, fuel, shelter, and bits there, and love. It's kind of that's all we really need as humans, I think.
Yeah.
A bit like plants just need a bit of sunlight and water. But you break it down really, and it's the same principles.
Yeah, of course. So you've mentioned kind of food and cooking, which we haven't really got onto. We've spoken a little bit about hiking and how that played a part in your journey. What role has cooking and the food played in that journey you've been on?
Well, a big role, I guess. I mean, these days, I guess that's what I'm quite known for. Is sort of cooking in the mountains under this sort of guise, this moniker of fell foodie. Calling the hills fells in the north where I'm from, merging that passion with food, and again mentioned briefly about how I was feeling myself in a way. But when I got into hiking, being on top of those mountains, feeling that sense of achievement of being out there. And the endorphin hit. Also, you'd probably spend a bit of time and have a bit of refueling on top of these hills. So you'd have a bit of lunch or something on there. And again, I wasn't someone that ever really liked quick convenience food. So while there's a bit of a movement, for like the pot noodle or bits in there, or maybe just a meal deal from the shops that, I've certainly been there myself at times and you're just picking something up quickly on the move. But it was more about really enjoying the food more, something I wanted to eat and how it was going to make me feel as well. So I didn't really enjoy eating that sort of food all the time in those hills. It was always the first thing you sacrifice on maybe a walk out there. It was just the last thing you think of in a way. It was kind of just snacks and things to keep you going. So I began sort of maybe taking little packed lunches with me, stuff I'd made the night before, like just in Tupperware. Maybe leftovers or meals I'd made, especially to go in the hillside. And I guess we'd sit on top of these hills and just have the Tupperware out there and just be eating quite a nice gourmet packed lunch in a way, while everyone else was getting the squash sandwiches out the bag that had fallen down the bottom and had been squashed by the water bottle. And I just really enjoyed that practice. And I called myself the Fell Foodie at this point and started a bit of an Instagram page at the time, which was all very anonymous. And looking back, I was probably still wearing a bit of a mask at the time. I didn't really want to share who I was. I didn't share to any friends that I'd set this account up. I'd never really had social media other than my personal Facebook. So it was quite a bit out there for me, putting yourself out to the world. So I was showing these pictures of the views I was experiencing and the food I was sort of cooking at home at the time, or then enjoying on the hillside. And it began to get a small little modest audience out there. And one particular chap walked past me one day and sort of commented what I was eating. And he was kind of going, "Oh, it looks nice, wish I had that today in my rucksack." He said, "Oh, you should get a stove next time and cook out here from scratch, and feed us all," sort of thing. And it sort of made a few cogs go in my head a little bit and sort of thought, you know what, maybe I should get a stove and actually start cooking out there, from scratch. I really enjoy cooking. I love cooking at home. I enjoy the practice of bringing something, that creative side of it, putting something together. I enjoy food being that conduit. People coming around, maybe less so now in this day and age, but sitting around the table with friends or family and sharing food with other people, going out to eat. So I enjoyed that practice, but I enjoy being outdoors. So if I do the two together, well, I enjoy that more or just as much. Turns out I do. So basically at the time I had no equipment either at the time, like the hiking side of things. So I bought this stove, but I was using all like the pots and pans I had at home in the kitchen. I was taking up proper plates and things with me. I think a pestle and mortar and a chopping board at one point, and trying to really cook like I would at home and just see if I could do it in this environment. And just being quite still in nature, I quite enjoyed. Whilst the practicality of it, of going, I wouldn't be expecting someone to go John O'Groats to Land's End and cooking like this every day. It's completely impractical. But going down to sort of the woodland for a day, or going down to the sort of the beach up a hillside to enjoy a sunset or enjoy a walk and have some nice lunch, was quite a nice activity in itself. So you were getting that activity, you're also getting that enjoyment, you were getting that luxurious bit, like it was mixing them all together. So I quite liked that sort of path. And really it began sort of this sort of snowball a little bit, I guess, of me sharing the meals I was cooking now on a camping stove in the outdoors, trying to showcase what was possible in the outdoors and minimal equipment, whilst always respecting the environment that was there as well. Always leaving no trace. I wasn't lighting any fires. I wasn't leaving any of my the waste behind. It was all bringing it all back down with me. So that was really important. Leaving it just as well for the next person, because it had been so instrumental for me being in the outdoors for a major change in my life that I wouldn't want that to be ruined for somebody else by turning up to a spot that was full of litter and scorch marks everywhere. So that was a huge thing. And again, began sharing this. And this following sort of growing a little bit online at the time. And I got to my second year sober in 2018. And I decided to share my story now out there on this platform to everybody else that I guess was gained as followers. And that again was quite a daunting moment, because whilst I'd revealed it to sort of friends and family and they'd come to terms with what I'd done, I was quite spoken out with them, I'd not really put myself out there to the world, I guess, in a way. Like I appreciate the fact I'm not doing a big address like the president of the US sort of to the world. Sort of in my little sort of corner of the internet, it was kind of me saying, what I'd been through and putting it out there into the world. The fact that I'd been known maybe for that path, or could be known for that path. And just like that first time, the support that came back from people, or the similar stories of people who'd found the outdoors or found time or exercise, or loved ones that sometimes hadn't got out of those paths that people had had, whether it was brothers or sisters, sons and daughters, or partners. Were really quite humbling messages to sort of receive. And a lot of people had found the outdoors as a similar tool for them mentally or physically. So that kind of made me feel as if I'd found a bit of a tribe in a way out there. And again, felt a natural place to be, finding sort of kindred spirits and enjoying that time in the outdoors. And it led to a few opportunities to be able to talk about this further. So it led to a few local chances to speak about this on local news, local newspaper, some national sort of niche outdoor magazines, and then more sort of broadsheet papers and bits out there too. So this really began this sort of sudden journey from never speaking out about this ever to now really going out there and voicing my personal lived experience, warts and all, to whoever would listen. It was a really sort of, it went so quickly, I guess. It wasn't really a chance to reflect, but I felt comfortable in doing that. I felt comfortable with the fact that I could articulate what I'd been through. I could share this, and perhaps the benefits that would have on somebody else, because I felt so alone when I was younger. I didn't know what I was going through. And whilst we've got a lot more of that now with the internet and people speaking out about this, it still can feel very lonely and very, very, very disheartening. So to add my voice to that conversation, to be a voice potentially for some of the voiceless, felt a very purposeful thing to do. And again, that purpose for me early on was something I really struggled with personally. So whilst again it wasn't a path that I ever really imagined treading, it was one that really allowed me to really discover myself, and one that I don't really regret or wouldn't change really, because it's made me really who I am now. So it was utilising that platform, I guess, for that path forward, and utilising food as that passion and that quirkiness, I suppose, of the the eccentric path of this guy who's gone on this little journey to all of a sudden being like, why is he cooking his dinner on top of a hilltop? Like, it's not really a natural progression, is it? But just it was just merging two passions for me. I always loved how food was, and the connection. It always came with good connotations of, family getting together for me, or seeing friends, and for others, I suppose, even for sort of survival purposes, for those maybe in life. But food was always the way around it, and watching cooking shows on the telly, reading cookbooks, seeing how people, enjoyed food on the continent, like in Europe, and it was all food outdoors, al fresco with the neighbours. I just love that sense of community and that human nature of it. That for me, again, felt very human being outdoors, felt very human sharing food. Having the two together just felt as if it was, ticking a box for me.
Wow. I think it's so common for people to kind of walk the path everyone else is walking, like we said back in when you went to university, when you started drinking, all that kind of stuff, to just exist and feel really unfulfilled. But then the few that break out and walk their own path then start to find purpose and meaning and feel like they're living a life that is more fulfilling. That sounds exactly like what you've done. Why was it important for you to be vocal about your story and your struggles?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, that one, I guess, isn't it? Because there's elements of, I suppose, you don't have to speak out about this. There's no point. And I think we often see a lot of campaigns now. I mean, they're fantastic campaigns. I mean, even one that often comes up, I think, is like the Time to Talk campaign for me. You know, they have the time once a year, making sure you do talk about what you're going through and reaching out to somebody else. And I always almost see the other side of that metaphor sometimes. In this day and age now, when we've all got social media accounts, we've all got voices that can be amplified, perhaps a lot bigger than they used to be able to. You think back in the olden days, it was kind of one that you could be shouting out in your little town, but that was as far as it would probably go. It wouldn't go, maybe go to the next town. It wouldn't go any further. Whereas now we've all got instantly a big platform to maybe go on there, regardless of following. It could go and shoot off into the digital sort of viral sphere, couldn't it? But for me, that had the two metaphors, that Time to Talk, where it was kind of one of those, I always push people to speak out there and speak to medical professionals. But I think there sometimes can be a bit of a blurring of the lines in this day and age. Of that means you've got to then talk publicly, which I think is your position to be. You don't have to speak about this to the world. This could just be something you say in confidence to a medical professional, to a family member, to a friend, to a colleague. And that is absolutely fine, just not suffering in silence by yourself. Whereas for me, it wasn't really a conscious thought path on the day. I remember being sat at work at the day. I just finished my shift. It was the 6th of June, obviously 2018. It was the anniversary of sort of my sobriety date. And I just really started just putting together a bit of a story on my Instagram about it, really. I don't think I had any calculated manoeuvres about it. I wasn't thinking, it's time for me to own this story, or it's time for me to get this out there, or people need to hear this. I just felt as if it still felt a bit of a secret to me, I suppose. And I felt I didn't want to hide that secret. I felt as if I was quite an open person these days. I felt I was quite out there. And for me, I was quite happy to have it in out there. So I didn't really consider any impacts, good or bad, from it, I suppose. I just sort of put it out there and just voiced it. So I did a lot of journaling actually when I first got sober. That's something my ex-partner actually not instructed but encouraged. One of the last things we sort of said to each other, really. And it was kind of something that really did help me. I was like, journaling, what's that going to do? Again, blokey mantras. Like, what's writing your thoughts in a book going to do? But I actually found quite a lot of joy in. I'd go to a coffee shop. What I replaced my alcohol with was caffeine, I think, at the time. Caffeine and exercise. But I enjoyed sitting in the cafe, being quite still, and just scribbling these little notes in this book about what I was feeling on the day, or little achievements I'd done and at the time. And when I set up the Instagram account, it felt as if my journal was becoming digital and public. And that's kind of how I shared things on there at the time. So I was known as being quite honest and quite open about retrospective feelings I'd gone through. So I suppose that was the natural feeling for that. It was kind of me just putting that journal entry out there.
Yeah.
Now on this digital bit. It's funny. I mean, I suppose there could have been a vanity thing, or there could have been a narcissistic element to it, but I don't think I had any of that. I don't think I was feeling as if, this is going to lead somewhere, or going to allow me to speak about this further. I just shared it, really. Really to try and maybe make someone else sort of feel as if they were going through that, or trying to come to terms with things, that someone else could see their path. I didn't see myself as a success. I was still very much a work in progress, as I am now. But it was just just an open, honest voice for that. That sort of answers that, doesn't it? There wasn't really any conscious thought to it, really.
What advice would you give to someone who is either sober curious or wants to give up alcohol because maybe they've recognised the negative impacts?
Well, from those that are maybe on the path where they are seeing it quite negative in their life, that in itself is a huge, huge first step. Just really realising that and coming to terms with that. There's many people that, where they're using this more as an addictive tendency, where making that step, some never get to that stage. They never see that issue they're going through, that problematic side. So that in itself is something to be celebrated and applauded. Just even considering that fact. Coming out that other nature of it, again, it's very much your life, it's your decision on these bits. I think where I'm often sometimes, if I'm around there socially, people still drink. I'm quite happy to be surrounded by people that drink. I know for some people that's something they can't do, and that's fine. You know what you're comfortable with, and again, making sure that's a non-negotiable for you as well. Not changing things, not being worried to go, look, I'm feeling a bit stressed by this or tempted. I'm going to leave this scenario. Absolutely fine. For me, I never wanted it to be a taboo in my life. I knew it would be around me for quite a lot. I didn't realise quite the extent, but when you're coming out that path, you know, the extent of where you see it on sort of, you know, billboards and advertisements and people talking, sort of, you know, activities or social events. It was all alcohol all the time. And that was something I hadn't really seen how ingrained it is in sort of society, which was quite difficult. But I didn't want to be someone that was having to like cross the street when I was walking past an off license, or not be invited to events because I didn't drink anymore. So I kind of quite quickly forced myself into those scenarios, which again wouldn't be for everyone, and I don't recommend to everyone. But I was taking myself to the pub still having a soft drink, and I went on a stag do quite early on for one of my good friends, and there was a lot of maybe not worry, but I suppose, you know, cautiousness around that, maybe of not to go on the stag do because it might be too early, too much for you. But I was like, well, I'm giving up alcohol. I'm not giving up my life. You know, I want to go to this event. One of my good friends celebrating, you know, his future marriage. So that was important to me. And if anything, I found I just got bored easier. I found I wanted to go to bed sort of about 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock when everyone else was, you know, in the karaoke bar, and these guys couldn't sing sober. So I was like, enough of this now, I'm going home. So, but not being worried about that either, not being worried about the fact, I can't be the one to leave first, or how it's going to be judged. And I often just face the music a lot now. I think people, you know, sometimes you meet new people that are going, oh, do you not drink? Or why are you not drinking? Or are you driving? And I kind of just say it as it is. I don't really shuffle it. I mean, I understand people maybe want to hide behind that in terms of if it's saying they're on medication, or, you know, they're pregnant, or they are driving at the time, but just saying you're not feeling it, or, you know, I don't want to drink today is absolutely fine.
Yeah. And
also respecting that if someone does say that, because looking back as well myself, I was a pusher. I think I was someone that was like, go on, have a drink. You're not drinking, get a drink, and I'd probably be coming from the bar with a drink. And looking now, I'm like, you know, I see that sort of how toxic that is really on that side. So I think it's not being worried by that. It's just knowing your own path, but also understanding sometimes you might find yourself in circles that can't comprehend that switch. And that's quite a difficult one for some people, where it could be families, could be friends, could be social settings, but they don't always allow that scenario. And again, maybe they are that pusher mentality, and you maybe have to distance somewhat as well.
Yeah.
Not seeing it as yourself, not seeing it any less of yourself because you're not drinking. It's your personal decision. And you're seeing a lot more now, especially younger generations, I think, a lot more now of people that are choosing just not to drink. Not because of, you know, family addictions or, you know, worries or the money, the price of it. Just for the health purpose. They just don't want to drink, or don't want that sensation, don't want that feeling out of control. And that's fine. So I think we're seeing more of a, again, societal change, a normality to it. Again, there's some for religious aspects as well, that it's less of an issue. So, and there's so many other options out there now. I mean, I don't mind the alcohol-free beers and things. Some people might find them quite triggering. I'm quite fine with them. I do find the spirits side of things can be a little bit triggering for me. I think it's a little bit too close sometimes to the real thing for me. It gives me that same sort of placebo effect. But the beers and things like that are absolutely fine. So again, there's such a plethora now of alcohol-free options, whether it's soft drinks or alcohol-free beers. So again, I really think that societally it's becoming less and less of a problem and more of a norm. So, and people are looking again health-wise. They're not drinking every day now. They're going, well, that's not the thing to normally do. It's maybe something I do once, twice a week sort of thing. And again, have a blowout. Absolutely fine. You know, go out there and have a big celebration. Go out on the weekend and bits in there, or go a bit too far at a wedding sort of thing. Absolutely fine. But I think if you just notice it's becoming a problem for you, then that's maybe the chance to make a change. And coming to that first step is a huge, big thing. And whilst my levels of consumption, you know, were very high at one point, I don't think it's, you know, it's not a race. It's not a game of bravado to say I've had more than you. You could be having one glass a night, and that is a problem for you. Someone else could be having 3 glasses, and they don't see it as a problem. May end up being a problem, but so the numbers don't add up. So I think sometimes it's very much a personal experience. If that's problematic, or the groups you're in, make that change and don't be feared of that change.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the societal shift because I don't really drink, like rarely drink, and probably stopped the first time around 2020, so probably close to COVID. And I remember at the time, like, I'd still go out and be in the same situations with the same people, and like you say, everyone's like, why not drinking? Just have a drink. And that push of people doing that, and it's just like, I don't want to. And I guess back then, I think sometimes I'd even not want to be around it because I don't want to be pushed into it, or I'd kind of not conform, but I'd be like, oh, why am I not drinking? But I'm at a place now where I have so many good people around me that also rarely or don't drink, that we connect over other things. So it's like I'm so comfortable and confident in walking my own path. Like I love it. So there's definitely been that shift in society. Can you tell us the importance of like small steps, because you didn't become this person overnight?
Massively, massively, yeah. I think it's, as well as that network, as well as I said before, this is very much not being just me walking this path. And so often, we are the creations of our communities and our societies, aren't we? We're not. We might think we're individuals as such, but there's very much a bigger part to play, sort of as part of the human race type of thing. So, for me, those little steps, yeah, it was very much pushing on. Not at the time, not thinking at the time that he's going to add up to a bigger thing, but there was certainly a bit of, when I first began running, for example. I mean, I need to dust off my running shoes again at the moment. I've not been doing a lot of running in the last few years, but something I really enjoyed at the time. It was really a big catalyst for me making the change, losing the weight and pushing on forward. But I remember I was really fearful and quite insecure of how people would visualise me running in the street, running in front of people. Like, I'd been quite happy to have had like a little, box room somewhere in the house where I could put a treadmill and just sit in that room in darkness and just that's kind of where I wanted to be again, hiding in my head a bit sometimes, which I still battle with that sort of thing. Maybe I quite like running in the dark at one point, or the head torch I used to go up, which I know not always for everybody, certainly different genders and stuff in the cities I understand, but for me there was a path of worrying about what people are going to think when they're watching you out there. Then I started to sort of switch that and think, well, look, it doesn't matter how fast I'm going, or how slow I'm going, how far I'm going, how short a journey is. I'm doing far more than the person that sat at home on the sofa. And that person that's home, I'm not talking about retrospect, that was me. I'm talking about me. So it was all about myself in the race, beating myself all the time. I wasn't beating everybody else around me. It was just bettering myself each time. So if I was sat at home there, then I wasn't going to get any fitter, I wasn't going to get any faster, I wasn't going to get any further, and I wasn't going to feel as good. So it was just constant little steps in that sort of path. And those little steps adding up in a way. And even the sobriety side, again, I mentioned, at one point you were looking at the clock and waiting for the click to the hour every time. Then you're waiting for it to click to the end of the day and you're watching the dates in the calendar. Whereas now it's sort of one of I probably couldn't tell you how many days sober I am now in a row. I don't know the figure now. It's probably close to sort of 2,000 or so now. But it was very much, you're looking at those little tiny steps all the time. But as they do accumulate, like that snowball rolling down the hill, getting bigger and bigger and bigger, you have to make those little steps and to be bigger things and make a bigger change. So they always say, don't they, the best time to start was then, the second best time is now. So I think that sort of path for me was, again, one that it isn't a linear path either. I'm still very much on that path myself. Whilst I feel I maybe slip back a little step at some points, I'm not at square one. Maybe at step 4 or so this time. I've come back a little bit, but I know that path. I've walked that path before, so I can make those steps again. And just not being so harsh on yourself at times, I think. Making those little steps, not being worried about being the beginner, not being worried to fail, going out, doing it, keep turning up and noticing that change as things go on.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's so important to recognise them small shifts, because people look externally and go, oh, he's now here, but they didn't see everything behind the scenes, all the work in between. What would you say to Harrison, who phoned his mum that night when he was in the midst of chaos, essentially, and everything felt too much?
Yeah, it's one of those, I suppose, at the time, I think I was very much someone that whatever I said, I wouldn't have listened. Really, I think I was in that path where I was so insular, I was so hardened maybe to the external opinions that I wouldn't have listened. But if I could get through to that person, obviously, thankfully, it was the case. But I think I'd probably just simply say, stay. Because for me, I didn't want to be here at that time. I hadn't wanted to be here for a lot of years. I was looking for my get out, my escape from the world, not wanting to, again, have that least impact. I was kind of really keeping myself present for others. Because I think the fear for me, of course, was the pain I'd inflict on family and friends by not being here. And I don't think that was an arrogant thing to say. People that did love you and people do love you in that sort of time. I don't want to listen to this. We'll have people that love them. But just staying, because without any of that, none of this now would be possible. So again, back to that small steps again, isn't it? You can't see that sort of future. And we often look ahead so much, and I do struggle with that. I very much a one day at a time sort of approach these days. If I see what's on my horizon, I just face that each day. Whilst yes, you want to make some plans going forward, and you have to make those adjustments. I do try and just improve one day at a time. Which then, I think that was kind of quite a problematic thing for me. I was looking ahead all the time, wanting to be at a certain place, not setting unachievable goals and then beating myself up for them all the time. But staying, knowing now that that's allowed all this to be possible, when there was a time when I would never have got to this point. And even really when I hit 30, I mean, I'm 34 now, but my 30th birthday was quite a milestone for me, because that was a moment that I'd almost set a self-imposed deadline to myself. That if I hadn't achieved certain things by 30, then that was it. I'd suffered long enough. I'd tried, and that was the moment that I was going, now that's the deadline. So hitting that point, obviously I was a very different mindset when I hit that point. I was maybe over 4 years sober when I hit that point there, and living a different life, embracing the hills, happy. Then that was quite a personal achievement as well, because that was constantly through my adolescent years. We'll get to 30, we'll see what it's like. We'll get to 30, we'll see what it's like. And then I got to that point, and I was quite happy to see the days that followed and see the years that have come since. So yeah, stay, I think is the word.
Thank you. Thank you for coming on today and sharing your story, because I think it's so powerful sharing the journey you've been on with others. Like you say, someone relates to that. Someone can say, I'm going through that now, but look where I can be if I make small changes in my life. So I appreciate you coming on today and just being so vulnerable and sharing your story.
Well, thank you for taking the time to listen to me as well. My sometimes waffles in bits out there, but no, it's a great privilege. Thank you to be able to share it and speak, and that's exactly that purpose, to try and maybe help somebody else in that path, and knowing they're not alone through what they're going through. But it is still very much a work in progress. As I say, there's still things I want to change, move forward to bits and stuff there. But having that network, speaking out about this when you are struggling, plays a huge role in moving forward. So thank you for giving me the opportunity.
You're welcome. I think we're all a work in progress, and that's why I want to platform people like yourself who've got a story and are just so open about it, and say, yeah, this is the journey I've been on, and I'm still not there. I won't ever be there. It's very much a work in progress, and that's how it is. So thank you again. Where can people find you? Because I know you do a lot of cooking outside and you put that on social media. What are the best platforms to get you on? Look into the camera and shout your platforms out.
So I'm known as Foodie. That's Fell, Foodie with an IE, on all social media platforms. You'll find me on there for various recipes and talking about my personal experiences with, I suppose, life and my personal battles. So that's where you can best find me, or find me on my website. Again, I'm not a medical professional, but I'm more than happy to receive any questions or any bits out there, both about maybe personal lived experience, or just about maybe cooking, hiking equipment, that sort of stuff as well, and what to cook. So you'll find things on there, and perhaps might see me at some events, festivals around the country as well, demoing, talking about my story, but also showcasing my love of outdoor cooking round and about.
Lastly, tell us about this, because I had a flick through this before we even started the podcast, and spotted some halloumi, gyros, and they look good. So come on, tell us about the book.
Thank you. Yeah, so again, this was a bit of a childhood dream really, to write a cookbook at one point, and I had the opportunity to do so. I signed a deal last year This came out in October, so we're just still under a year at the time, but it's basically recipes all around cooking in the outdoors. So all designed around a single burning camping stove, but will be just as great for people in a camper van, motorhome, maybe even a canal boat, perhaps even areas like this. And all recipes designed around that. You don't need an oven for all, single burner in there. But 85 different recipes, from sort of breakfast options to sandwiches to something special, one-pot meals, desserts, all in there. Just to really try and really motivate people to eat better in the outdoors, because I think there's great passion in that for me. And you don't have to take all the equipment out and cook it all there for you. You could cook these at home, pack it into a nice little food flask, go and enjoy it somewhere. Even if you're walking on your lunch break from work somewhere, head into a bit of green space, go on a dog walk, go to the coast, go to the woodland, sit, spend the time, even have a podcast on like this perhaps, or sit and enjoy the ambient sounds of nature, enjoy some food in the great outdoors. It's a really, really human experience. But I've also got plenty of tips around equipment and stuff in there as well, do's and don'ts of the outdoor, the countryside code and stuff of Leave No Trace. But otherwise, it's been a great joy to bring it together and have it on the shelves sort of nationwide. It's, again, something else I'd never imagined during those darker days. So Cookout's the book. For those that are looking, Cookout available in all good bookstores. I'm enjoying saying that bit.
My last guest did say that, but what does that even mean, all good bookstores? Go on, give a couple bookstores a shout out.
That's it. Well, it's endorsements here, are they? Sort of, yeah, other bookshops are available, are we? Not BBC, are we? So we can say that.
I would say anything you want. I just want to know where people can find that book.
It's fine. I mean, currently it is at Waterstones nationwide. I think
Waterstones.
It is any sort of local to here. I mean, this podcast goes much further than that, but it is sort of Waterstone Deansgate. It was nice to see it in there, on the largest bookstores in the north, which was great to see it in there. It's available on Amazon, all nationwide as well, both nationally and internationally, and also being some great sort of independent retailers as well. So really important to support those if they are close to you, independent bookshops, some of the outdoor retailers as well. And if you do find it, let me know. We don't have no purpose to buy it, of course, but do let me know if you spot it somewhere, because I often don't know actually which bookstores individually stock it, because they usually go through wholesalers. But it's been great seeing it pop up in, you know, the likes of Aberdeen or down in Cornwall, down in Norfolk. I've had a couple even in Germany and America, which has been bizarre, but you often don't know unless you're here. So if a book owner has stocked it, then thank you very much. If you spotted some, do let me know. But yeah, it's available in all good bookstores, as they say.
Amazing. Remember, you don't have to be hiking, you don't have to be outdoors to cook any of these recipes. They can all be done at home as well. I'll be getting one because I spotted quite a few nice things in there, so thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for listening.